Welcome to the Creative Chats podcast with Mike Brennan. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Creative Chats. It's the podcast for artists, makers, and content creators where we talk about creativity, the creative process, and story. I'm your host, Mike Brennan. You can connect with me over on my website, which is mikebrennan.me, and I would love for you to sign up for my email newsletter, which goes out once a week, every Monday, and it is free. And I know we don't like to clog up our email boxes with more stuff, but this, trust me, this is something that I designed with you in mind. The emails are crafted in such a way that you receive some inspiration and some application. If you're looking for some creative prompts, I have a section in there that are daily creative prompts, giving you the ability to choose some new things maybe that you want to try. Maybe you just need someone telling you what to do so that it sparks some ideas, or things are just too wide open with your creativity otherwise, and you find yourself spinning your wheels. So if you're someone who has been struggling with your creativity, you've been looking for some resources, I would love to provide some of those for you. So there's dailycreativehabit.com. If you go there, you can find not only the Daily Creative Habit Journal, which is a 90-day workbook, which you can work through on your own to set intention and then come back at the end of the day and say, did I do what I said I was going to do? Track and measure what it is that you want to be creating to make sure you're getting momentum, you're being consistent. And there's also a free Facebook group that you can join with like-minded creative people, all sorts of creative outlets and endeavors that are happening. We would love for you to be a part of that as well. So if you go to dailycreativehabit.com, you'll find those resources and more to help you show up and create. Because I truly believe, and I say this all the time, but I really mean it, when you create, we all win. Now, for today's episode of Creative Chats, I get to sit down with Ben Rennie. And Ben is an amazing designer, but he's more than that. He's more than a designer. He's more than a creative director, an agency owner. I mean, he's worked with global brands that you would recognize, and some of them we mentioned in our conversation today. But more than that, I love that Ben has this ability to tap into his experiences, his journey, to examine them. We talk about his new book that is coming out, which is Lessons in Creativity, and what that helped him do as far as really look back and see the lessons that he's learned and be able to talk about those things and offer them to the reader and offer to them to the people around him. And we have a deep conversation today. We talk about just really the some of the pains and joys of creative entrepreneurship. And we talk about traveling through this life and engaging, showing up, saying no to opportunities, even ones that seem like they're great opportunities, but may not be the best opportunities. And so I believe you're going to enjoy this conversation, and you're really going to want to get your hands on Ben's book. There'll be links in the show notes for you to be able to click and get that very easily. And go check out his website, look at his work for his agency. He's somebody that you want to be around because it's not just talent, but it's also heart. And there's just a vulnerability and sensibility to him that I think you'll really appreciate, because I know I did. And so without further ado, here is my creative chat with Ben Rennie. Well, Ben, welcome to the Creative Chats podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, mate, for having me. I appreciate it, Mike.
Yes, I am excited. We were talking before we got rolling here about just design, and I'm loving that we're going to be able to talk about some of that, have that background in common, and the importance of that it really does touch everything. And so, yeah, I know we're going to talk about some great things today that are going to be informative and also inspirational, and just get into your story and your journey. So I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, thank you.
So I would love to just start in a place of like, where did creativity start for you? Like, even as a kid, like, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, I was a late bloomer to creativity and what I call creative confidence in particular. So I grew up in a world of sport, like, you know, dominated by change rooms and cricket bats, and not a very popular sport in America, cricket, but it is a popular sport here in Australia. And so for me, growing up around sport, I always felt like that was my path. I was going to be one of those young 18, 19-year-olds that was going to take over the world and play cricket for Australia, for my country. And you quickly realise, you know, at the age of sort of 21, that there's a choice you need to make. Whether you go down that path, and that's a challenging one, or you or you sort of step back from that and find something else. And for me, I moved into the snow sports world. And snow sports was just full of creativity. It was, brands, connection, risk taking, ambition. So going from team sports, which I love, and I don't want to knock team sports, it's critically important. But for me, it was school of hard knocks team sports. It's lifting people up by knocking them down, and you're competing against your teammates, which I always found really strange. Whereas action sports or being out in the mountains in nature was complete opposite of that. It was always about discovery, exploration, nature. So my connection to nature was sort of the foundation of my creativity. And the other part of that, and I only discovered this when I was sort of writing my book, um, and doing the sort of research as to how I found my role into design and creativity. And it was long journeys with my mum on road trips back to see her family. It became really an intriguing part of that. And during my sort of research for the book, one of the things that, and it's interesting looking back, and I always had this resistance to look back, but when I started looking back, I started to sort of remember these moments where we would pull over into knick-knack shops and mum would find, like old secondhand shops. I'm still obsessed with this. And she'd pick something up and she'd always say, I wonder if this could talk, the stories it would tell. And I always found that really interesting, the stories that it could tell. And that became like a connection with me through things, and things being, this obsession of wanting to make things and build things that could connect with people in a way. So, I suppose it come from long journeys with my mum on road trips to see her family, and definitely nature. That was my connection for sure.
Yeah. I love asking that question because so often we can trace back to our history and moments that say, here was the seed of something that got fanned into flame. And even if it was unconscious, there are still parts of that we're drawn towards and that develop and that inform us in what we do and why we do it. So it's interesting that those elements are there, and the fact that you had the ability to sit down and think about this, and for preparing for your book, which we'll talk about in a minute, but to think about like your experiences, to document, to kind of gather up and go like, let me sit with myself and think about what has my journey been. That's like
Yeah,
a gift you give to yourself, right? I mean,
totally agree.
what was like maybe a surprising revelation you had about that?
I remember hearing Steve Jobs talk about, he did an address to his university, and he said you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking back. So that was the catalyst for me to look back and to go, well, that's interesting. I want to connect the dots. And so I think the biggest revelation for me was, you know, what I'm talking about now when I look forward into creativity, I never saw my life in any way whatsoever related to design or creativity at all. I was at 20, I wanted to sort of play cricket for Australia, and then I wanted to be the best snowboarder in the world. And you start to realize that these things are grand ambitions. Over time, what I was really doing was selling shoes in a sports store, for a living. And I think all of these things are really important, but you don't know that at the time. But looking back, I sort of realized the critical importance of customer engagement, or discovering how to ride a snowboard for the first time, or make a critical choice to step away from professional sport into something that is brand new. And at 50, it's easy to look back with wisdom and go, I get the critical importance of that. But at 20, I didn't see any of that. I was just a kid trying to find my way in the world. I like it, and that informs me as a parent. I've got 3 kids. I think having children is the most creative journey of all, because we get to mold and shape together, if we can. And I'm luckily that I have a strong relationship with my kids where we can do that journey together, parenting and evolving and growing. And I had that same connection with my parents too. So I think those things are really important. So the revelation for me is, like the confidence it gives me for the next chapter. The thing I like to do is look at my life, and my book gave me this, is in these tiny chapters about what informed the next chapter. Like what was the catalyst there that made me go from being, a snowboarding bum living on people's couches to an entrepreneur that owned an eyewear company at 25. And I always think it was ego at the time. It's like, what can I do next that's going to be cool? But I think it's always more than that. It's this sort of understanding of trying to connect and find your place in the world. That is, I love Scott Galloway, and he talks about, don't chase your passion, find out what you're good at and do that. And if you're good at something, that determines what you're passionate about, sort of not the other way around. And I really love that. I mean, I don't deny if you know your passion, I think that's a great thing, and we encourage our kids to sing and to play music and to do things like that. But at the same time, chasing what you're good at and getting really elite at that is a really cool thing too.
Yeah. Yeah. And this thought of like, having this journey and examine journey actually gives you a filter also, I think, to know like what really you should be doing, why you should be doing it, and what to say no to, right? Because sometimes you have opportunities that come your way that they look like they're great, and maybe they are great opportunities, but they aren't necessarily the right next step for you, and they may take you sideways, right? I mean, have you had those experiences?
Yeah, for sure. I don't think you can. I don't think you can be told that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think for me that was my revelation at 40. Is this, or 45 almost? Is saying no is a really powerful force and a really important thing, because I spent a lot of time in my early stages of my business saying yes, and I write about this in the book, and how when you sort of say yes, you can start with something that looks like this. We build our mission statement, our value statement, all the things we want it to be as a business. And when you pick your market or your client, that actually determines what your business becomes. It's not the other way around, right? So, if we start selling to Gulf Oil or BHP Billiton, some of the biggest, fossil fuel companies in the world, which we did provide services to them, then irrespective of whether we want it to be a small boutique focused on innovation and creativity, sustainable B Corp, we aren't that anymore. We're something different. So the power of no comes into determining your value set in the same way someone who believes in Christianity or a certain religion will have a set of values that they're aligning to. And that became really important to me. But, we've always had values instilled in us by our family. But at the same time, when it came back to my business and my professional choices, it took me a long time to realize the importance of no, for sure. And the amount of times I said yes to something because the commercial value was worth it, not the emotional value or the connection to the work. And the biggest lesson I could take away from that, and I find life being really mean like this, is, for me, I had to go through the journey to discover that, yes has weight, and so does no. So, the idea of saying no to a bank to do a consultancy job on creativity or brand design because we want to leave ourselves open to work on a startup that hopefully down the line changes something profound, was a really powerful thing to do. And it wasn't until the latest iteration of our business, in 2018, 2019, that we understood the power of that and had the confidence to do it as well.
Yeah, yeah. And you're right. It's getting in there, doing the work and figuring that out as you go, because there's no roadmap necessarily for that kind of stuff, especially like, I mean, you could look to other businesses and other people for examples of things, but there's always context for you and for your business that may not be applicable, because they're doing something else. They have different
Mm,
values. They have
yeah.
different relationships and networks, and knowing how to navigate that to go, okay, let me make the wisest choice possible, knowing I'm still going to make some mistakes, but that's also going to be a learning opportunity and
Mm.
figuring out as I go open handed,
Yeah,
I love that.
that's so interesting. And I think this idea of, you can want to replicate someone else's business. You can look at it and go, that's aspirational to me. I want to create that. Sometimes I think it's okay just to try to, because you're never going
Mm.
to do it. You're never going to be the same thing, because the characteristics that you bring as an individual, the values you've had through your family, the experiences that you've learned will just make it different. It's not going to be the same thing, unless you're making, a pair of shoes that looks like this and you're just copying it. That's not creativity, nor is that a good idea. But if, like I know for us, when we set up our business, we wanted to be IDEO. It's like, IDEO is amazing. Let's go and build IDEO. And I remember there was a business in New York called Fahrenheit 212. I was a bit obsessed with the name, but I was also obsessed with the story they told themselves about that. So, I thought, let's go and do that. Let's build that business and do that. And once you give it a new name, your own value, it's never going to be, no one in the history of life will ever look at our business and go, oh, it's like them. It's going to be our version, interpretation of an innovation consultancy or a design consultancy that is unique to us. And again, the minute you pick your clients, you determine your difference and your market approach is we were not IDEO. We weren't solving, global challenges of famine and hunger. And, we were feeding Gulf Oil's machine, like with big ideas. So it took us a long time to go, that's not the road we want to head down. We're going to change that and do something different.
Yeah.
Tough,
Yeah.
tough decision.
Yeah. Certainly. And I think all those things you learn, that the influences become like ingredients, like you're making something new. And certainly you can be inspired by and you can learn from and you can even try to replicate some things. But like you said, at the end of the day, it's going to be different because you have your fingerprints all over things
Yeah.
and it's different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think is a blessing because who would want to create something that somebody else has already created and then
Totally.
work in that, live in that? That sounds like prison. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the aspiration is nice. I like Rick Rubin. He talked in his book, and I loved his book. It was such an easy read. It was like just a book of wisdom. And, where he said, like he had someone comes to him with an idea for a concept, and his first response is, "Oh, that's like Johnny Cash. I know that. Let's do that." Because the minute you give that Johnny Cash riff to the Red Hot Chili Peppers, it's not going to sound like Johnny Cash anymore. It's going to sound
Right.
like the Chili Peppers with their own version of a sound that feels familiar. And I sort of like that idea from an aspirational point of view. But yeah, I agree with you. I think the idea of copying or replicating is sort of that's a dangerous place to play. And a prison is a great way to describe it. I couldn't even imagine.
Yeah. So let's talk about your book, Lessons in Creativity. First off, I want to know, like, why? Why did you write this book? Like, what was the motivation behind this?
Yeah, again, I'm going to say ego. I want to come up with a better reason. And if there was a better reason, I always had this idea of, this sort of multi-life for me. There was two things happening in my life. I grew up in Western Sydney in the most amazing part of Australia called the Blue Mountains in Penrith. And it was a hardworking, working class town. And interestingly, my work somehow on this journey of snowboarding and brands took me to work with some really cool brands like Dolce & Gabbana, Chanel, Prada. So there was this sort of interesting period of my life where I found myself in Milan a lot at fashion shows, which is a really odd thing to get your head around when you grow up, in football town, a sporting environment, or that was everything opposite to that. I think one of the things that was really interesting to me, and it's a story I tell in the book, is and this is why I wanted to write it. There's two reasons why I wanted to write it. One was this idea of this life I was leading that I wasn't comfortable sharing. I got invited to the launch of the Dolce & Gabbana nightclub in Milan called Gold. And I actually Googled it. I don't think it's there anymore. So when you're standing on a red carpet for the first time in your life in Milan, and your roots are very firmly pressed in, small town Australia or small town America, which is a great term, it's a really weird thing to adjust to. This my little imposter on my shoulder would make me feel definitely like I didn't deserve to be there, and it's interesting when you meet someone like Stefano or Domenico who own Dolce & Gabbana, and they're dressed in their $8,000 suit, and you're wearing a $199 suit from Oxford Men's in Western Sydney because you don't understand fashion. And it's a terrifying feeling. So I remember going into that, and the weird thing happened was, first of all, I didn't feel like I deserved to be there. And the second thing happened was the whole place was gold plated with the beer taps were gold plated, the knives and forks were gold plated. It was a very opulent cafe during the day, nightclub at night, owned by Dolce & Gabbana. And so my approach to convince my mates that I was there, because I didn't know how to tell them, was to steal the knives and forks, right? And put them in my pocket. And the interesting thing about that is, I look back now at 50 and I don't know where the knife and fork is, nor did I tell my mates that I had that experience. And as we're sitting down having casual conversations as I'm getting older and in I suppose, starting to develop my own creative confidence, I would share these stories, of which my mates would be like, "What? You would wear?" Meeting Valentino Rossi at a Ray-Ban event, or hanging out with Ronaldo at a launch party like that. Not as mates, we're not friends, but we're in the room. At 50, I look back on that now and go, you know what? I wasn't in that room because I made it up or I was a fraud. I was in the room because I got invited. And the reason I was invited is because of the choices I made prior to that in my creative life, which led to that moment. And it took me a long time to accept that. So writing about it was a journal for me, a personal journey to understand what that meant. And the second part, and this is a bit more personal, was, between my mum had cancer for 15 years and she passed away in 2018. And just before she lost the ability to talk, before she passed, she would make jokes that she always wanted to write a book about our life. She's, I'm going to write a book one day. And I know deep down she was never going to write a book, nor did she ever want to. It was just a last minute thing in her head during the end of her life that she thought was a really inspiring thing. And in a moment, I said to her, "Oh, it's okay, Mum. I'll write it. I'll write the book." And about a week after, or 2 weeks after she passed, I started writing the book. So that was 7 years ago. So it's been a long time coming. And I put the book down. I picked it up, put it down, it wasn't until COVID that I actually went, you know what, probably like the rest of the world, let's do something creative and finish that. So yeah, that's where it came from.
Yeah. Man, there's so much in there.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No. It's
Yeah.
it's great. It's great. One of the things I'm thinking about is when you're in a room of people who are influential and have some kind of authority, and I love that you said you had to remind yourself that the work that you had done is the reason why you were there, why you were invited in there. Most people aren't going to find themselves in rooms with people like that. How Like, what advice would you give to somebody that might be helpful where they're thinking, if I just had a client that was, X, Y, or Z, or this certain caliber, then that would help elevate me because my proximity to them. How much of that is actually true where you you have benefit of a certain caliber of clientele and access to them maybe? How much does that really inform your work, other opportunities, or is that typically something that just kind of happens, is an experience, but isn't necessarily built upon? You know what I mean?
No, I definitely know what you mean. Um, you've got, communication is such an important part of our brand or who we are or our career. The ability to have conversations that are really honest and, um, the and I think that comes from your relationships and the people that you surround yourself with. I always call it actually, Rhonda Brighton Hall, when I was working for Ray-Ban, Rhonda used to say to me, if I can't fit in the palm of your hand, meaning 5 things to do today, or 5 goals, or 5 objectives, or 5 action points, then it's just too many. It's overwhelming. So I've always had, from that moment, I've always sort of listed 5 things. But the same is true with your friends, I think, and the networks and the people that you spend time with. And for me, I don't think it needs to be ingenuine, but you need to be aware of the environment and the places you're in. And everything's a crossroad, everything's a fork in the road. Do I go to the party or don't I? And I'm an introvert. I like to be in the company of 4 or 5 people at dinner, but I don't like to be in the company of 45 people at a party, right? I find it really challenging. But at the same time, I love the company of friends over coffee or sitting in the ocean with a mate, and I'll talk for hours about that. With very, very honestly, but in a room full of people, it's more challenging. So for me, it's like, how do I find myself in an environment? And I learned that really early. So how do I encourage myself to be around small groups more often? And who are those small groups? And what can I learn from them? And what can I, contribute to that group? There's something I learned years ago was, if you don't smoke, but your circle of 5 do, irrespective of what you've been taught from a value point of view, there's a good chance you're probably going to give it a try. If your group of friends like to hang out the mall and just stand there and talk shit about other people, whilst that might not be your values you've been given from your family, the good chances of you becoming that person are really high. So I learned this really early. My daughter was sort of brought into this sort of conversation really early as well. She's a professional athlete, and I feel like that. I don't want this to sound ingenuine because I think your circle of friends needs to be tight and based on love and connection. But at the same time, your career needs to be influenced by the right environments and the right people, and that's a two-way act, right? So going into a job where you're not getting, I suppose, mutual um, reward emotionally, that's a problem for your career. Find the place where it's collaborative, it's two-way, and excuse me, you and your team or your boss are building each other up and out, right? So, I think you want to look for expanders, in that conversation. So for me, that was always important. I think that helped me evolve into better rooms and better places really quickly. It's also a potentially dangerous thing, and one of the things that is interesting in this is the better the room. I remember working for a company called Luxottica, and by pure association of the influence that the brands they owned gave my career a boost, irrespective of any talent or any skill I had. Working for Ray-Ban and Oakley, right, was cool for my brand. People of influence want free Ray-Bans. All of a sudden, there's a connection beyond anything I've ever brought to the world, right? Someone else built that business. Luckily for me, I'm associated with that brand, and that brand draws me to a new world. It's like, what do you do with that world? Is it you need free Ray-Bans, cool, there's some free Ray-Bans, or is it trying to connect in a way with people at a very human level to expand on, there's an opportunity in this for me too, right? I'm being asked to work on a film with, called Dewey Cox, to give them sunglasses for the launch. Do we just post them out, or do we go, well, I want to come, I'm going to sit in the room and I'm going to meet Dewey Cox. I can't remember the main actor's name. What's his name? From Ricky Bobby, that actor. Adams.
Yeah.
Amazing. Hilarious.
You talking about Will Ferrell?
No, the other guy. So
the other guy.
So he's in Ricky
Bobby's. I know who you're talking about. Yeah. I can't think his name right now. I can see his face in my. Yeah. It'll come at like 3:00 in the morning. We'll both be like, oh.
He's Ricky Bobby's best mate. My kids would know his name.
Yes.
They'd be all over it. But, like he does a movie called Dewey Cox, and it's like, you know what, I'm going to go. I'm going to go to the launch of that.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to go.
John C. Reilly,
that's him.
Yeah, sorry.
So they launched that movie in North Bondi RSL, and I'm like, well, you know what, I'm going to go, and I'm going to listen, I'm going to learn, and I'm going to be in a creative space full of creative thinking and opportunity. And not because I want to meet his celebrity, because I want to be present. And I want to see what happens in that choice to be present in the room. So I think, that's an example of Ray-Ban gave me an opportunity to expand my brand. It's like, send us some sunnies for the launch. We're going to do a giveaway. It's like, you know what? I'm going to bring them. I'm going to bring them along. I'm going to be there. And I think they're little choices you make. And, that those choices for me to be present and aware of that were really important. And they definitely are part of the reason you end up in, a fashion show with Karl Lagerfeld on stage or somewhere like that, because it's like, well, if that's happening and I'm in Milan, then I'm going to be in the room and I'm going to sit there and listen to that. Not because I love Karl Lagerfeld, and by the way, some odd reason I do. The reason is because what happens from that environment, what creativity can spawn from it. They're the things I'm searching for. And when my kids go overseas to play sport in America, it's like, how do I go to? How can I go? What can I do? Like, how can I afford to do that? How can I make it work? And what opportunities can sort of, I suppose, break out from that for me?
Yeah. Love that. There's such wisdom in there. And it's like, get in the room, right? That's the first step, is just get in the room with the people, and then contribute something of value, right? I mean, it's not simply enough just to be in the same room, because you could be in the same room and then nothing ever really transpires from that. And, you don't bring anything of value. It comes and goes, and that's it, right?
Yeah. It also comes back to the importance of being present and aware that the journey is actually more important than the end. And I think we talk about this a lot, right? That guy could have been anything, or that guy went to college, could have played D1 ball, could have gone to NBA, right? I actually find that conversation quite frustrating, because I think it sort of denies where they are, and it denies the choices they made. The hardest choice in life is to choose a different path, right? The obvious one, as a D1 athlete, to go and play NBA or G League, that's obvious for us because we admire, excuse me, we admire celebrity, we admire, elite athletes, and we admire anything elite. But maybe that person's dream was to get married and settle down and have a farm, or to, in my case, walk away from a sport that I'm really grateful I did, cricket, because if you watched it tomorrow, you'd probably fall asleep. So there's that reason. But the other reason is I just didn't love it. It was just what I fell into, and I never questioned it, like, ever. And when I did question it, I realized that what I wanted was to be in an expansive, creative, action-fueled environment at 20, not a boring cricket dressed in white, standing in the sun on a Saturday environment. And that was my life now. I can go back to that dot and go, the bravest choice I ever made was not to follow all the people telling me I was great at sport. It was to choose a very different path. Again, connecting the dots looking back is easy. Looking forward's really hard. But, I just think that those moments are just, so important and brave.
Yeah, for sure. So in the book, I'm sure you're sharing lessons, you're sharing stories. Is there like a key takeaway that you hope that when somebody finishes the book that they walk away with?
Yeah, for sure. I think creative confidence is the sort of running through line or the takeaway for me. And, there's multiple ways to have this conversation. The book's written in 6 parts and 18 chapters. Each part has three chapters to it. And sure, I draw on, conversations I'm having in boardrooms with really cool brands, and we're taking the lessons from those businesses and I'm giving them to people to go, hey, here's some insight for the world. That's one part. The other part is, curiosity is really important. But one of the stats that I read early when I was writing the book, was, I heard this stat that 96% of kids believe they're creative, whereas by adulthood, only 26% believe they are. I found that really interesting and sort of daunting. The second part was, and I only just read this in another research piece, was that by 50, only 3% of people believe they're creative. That's staggering, right? So creativity for me is the enemy of fear. It's the enemy. It's the antidote to fear. So curiosity is everything. So what we're talking about being in those rooms is led by curiosity about what could happen. What's my moment? And the book was originally written, titled How to Save the World from the Shower. And that's not suggesting I've got the answers as to how anyone can save the world. It's because we have these moments, all of us, where we might be in the shower, in some traffic, and we have these little light bulb things where we go, oh God, I could build that brand, or I could write that book, or I could paint that picture, or I could, do that dance. And then the light turns red and we drive on, or green, sorry, and we just drive on. Or we get out of the shower and we towel down and we go to work. How to save the world from the shower is this idea about what if we didn't do that? What if we didn't towel down and go to work? What if we stopped and went, I'm going to chase that. I'm going to scratch that itch and see what comes of it. So, Lessons in Creativity was a new name that the publisher came up with, which I love because How to Save the World from the Shower made no sense whatsoever. So I'm glad we came up with that. But it's not a self-help book. It's a series of stories and conversations and hopefully insights that someone can apply to see themselves in, And there's no real rhyme or reason as to why I was sitting in a board meeting with, I don't know, let's name a brand, Chanel in Sydney, and someone else wasn't, And this is a realization for me was in 2016. My business partner and I built this really good business. We got it up to, a really elite creative advisory business, doing great work with. An example of this is Australia Post, our governing mail business. When they needed to shift from traditional mail to digital, they rang us, right? So we're in a really unique position. And I was sitting in the McLaren Vale in Adelaide, in South Australia, which is a beautiful wine region. Sitting in this wine region, I got this real period of anxiety where I'm sitting in this room and I'm advising brands and a big bank on the future of the bank, right? And there's also this realization of, I don't need to be doing that. They're going to be okay. The bank will be okay. And the interesting thing about this was being in McLaren Vale, we're in nature. We're in a vineyard. And I remember I want to be outside among that. I don't want to be in here among this. And I don't want this to sound superficial because I know how hard it is to have a job or career and so forth. But for me, I'd built that environment. I'd created that business and I was in a room doing something I didn't want to do anymore. And I'd created that opportunity. So at the same time, I can choose to create an alternative path to that. So on that same day, I left that meeting. I got on a plane back to Sydney 3 days early. And, my wife was well aware of the challenges of me building a business that wasn't aligned with our values. We got on a plane and we went to America, and we went to America for 3 months. And the goal was to redesign the business to the business we wanted it to be. What that 3 months became was actually 4 years of us living in snow towns as a family, traveling the world and trying to understand about nature in a different way, nurture in a different way with our kids as parents, and almost spending our life savings and our retirement plan at a time when it felt really important for me, my mid-40s. And also, we couldn't afford to do it, but I don't feel like I could afford not to do it. So the idea was, let's spend 3 months in nature with the family to redetermine who it is I want to be and who we want to be as a family and what business we need to build that reflects those values. And it became 4 years. And in that 4 years, I was foraging for work. I was foraging in the same way that, we would go out to a gold mining town in the 1800s and find a creek and look for gold. I was doing the exact same thing in a modern day world. I was getting online and looking for a job, of a design job or a creative job or to build a website. And I would do that to survive for that period because that period was about survival, discovery, learning. And what came out of it was, none of this is easy. This is all hard. And building a business is not easy. It's hard. I sort of got this idea of you can fail at doing something you don't love. So you may as well give it a crack on trying to do the thing you do love. And I don't feel like failing is misunderstood. I got okay with the idea that it might not work because I'm in the space that I wanted to be in. The good, the bad, the struggle, the ups, the downs, right? So that was my journey from 2018 to 2022, was then COVID sort of forced us into this execution of pull the trigger and do something. And that's where Rennie, my agency, came from. So if there's a takeaway in the book, it's sort of that. It's like, I think you're going to be okay. You know, you're going to be all right. And we can do more than we think. If you told me that plan prior to doing it, I wouldn't have done it.
Right.
I wouldn't have done it. It was a lot of ad hoc choices at the time to go out and just try and survive, you know. So that's the takeaway for me.
Yeah, that's so beautifully articulated. I love that sense of nature, putting yourself there and kind of recalibrating. I think about how when things are kind of spiraling in some part of my life, that desire to get out, to go for a walk in nature, to go to some place where there's water, which used to be easier when I lived in the Northeast. But even here, go to a lake or a pond or something, and just be around something where it's a reminder to me that like there's a natural order to things, and that I get to see, oh, you know what, like birds are still doing their thing, and
Totally.
the sun is still setting, and all the things that have been doing that since the beginning are still doing that. And yet, even though I feel like my world is spiraling, I can be in a place where there's order and there's peace, and it's just a tremendous reminder. And so I love that there are lessons from nature that we can certainly glean, and it sounds like you have for sure too.
Yeah, I love that. The birds are still singing. That is so good. And when before my mum passed away, she said that whenever you hear a kookaburra, which is a very famous Australian bird, it's probably me just telling them to stay in line. So that was for me another value around me. That sort of if I'm it keeps you morally upright. That little kookaburra in the background. I'm like, it's like my tattoo on my hand here. I've got no tattoos in my life, and when I got this tattoo, the tattoo artist said, "Where else have you got tattoos? Have you got much art on your body?" I said, "No, it's my only one." And he said, "I've been doing this job for 30 years and I've never had someone's first tattoo on their hand. That's usually the opposite, of what we do." But it's on my hand to remind myself of my value. It's when I shake someone's hand, I can't unsee this. And my biggest challenge in life is to accept way less than I'm worth all the time, and so that journey taught me that, and it reminded me that you've got something to give to the world, give it. Creativity is critically important, but don't be afraid to ask for your worth. And I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about the exchange of time in exchange for something mutually beneficial to that partnership. That became really important to me. So it's on my hand. So it gives me the confidence that if I'm going to shake hands and lean into something, I'm going to do it in a way that aligns with all these things that we've tried to build and create. And again, I don't think any of this is easy, but we can make it easier when we align it with, a set of values. And you talk about ocean and nature. I've been surfing for, I don't know, I'm 50, 32 years. I'm probably the worst surfer in the history of the world who surfs for 32 years. There's no doubt about that. But it has nothing to do with performance. It has everything to do with connection to the ocean and the vastness of nature, and sitting there without a ping, no pinging, no phones, no noise. So my experience of sitting on a mow in the ocean is more important than catching a wave, because that presence of just being, like you said, reminded that the birds still sing, irrespective of how big or small our problems are, is really critical. So yeah, that was my understanding about the journey of, I'd rather be outside in the vineyards than in the boardroom. So how do I build a life that can give me both, balance that out?
Yeah. Yeah. What does your tattoo actually say?
It's Ikigai. I got it before the book came out, mind you, a long time ago. My kids, we spent a lot of time in Japan. I love Japan. And I would, if my wife will attest to this, I would move there in 30 seconds flat and live in that country. It's just beautiful. So, it's just, I just love those people. Like I remember being in Japan with my son snowboarding, and we got to the car park one day and we left his snowboard up against the car with his boots next to it on the floor. We go inside and we forgot that they were even there. And we wake up in the morning and I look at Kai and I say, "Mate, where's your snowboard? Have you even got it? Would you leave it at the resort?" And we look out the hotel window from the 5th floor and there's 80 people in the car park busily walking around going to work, and there's his snowboard just sitting next to the car. I'm assuming Nashville, that board's gone. I know in Sydney that board's not lasting more than 8 seconds. And that's just the community of world I want to live in. That's wild. I'd like to think I wouldn't take the board. Maybe maybe 3 days later I'd go, maybe that's mine now. But,
Right.
I just think that environment is just wild. And so I've always connected with that country and those people. And I was in an earthquake once in Japan. Yeah, wild, long story. And the way that country dealt with that crisis was just wonderful, like amazing. So that's a key guy for me, was this, don't be afraid to ask for your value. And that connection comes back to those people,
Yeah. Yeah. I totally relate to the one tattoo, and I only have one here. I have this one that says beloved. It's, when you're wired like us, it has to have meaning. It's not just something there for decoration. And it's the only tattoo that I'll ever have because it's about identity for me. It's
Yeah.
about, for me believing that I am a child of God and that's my true identity. And if I ever lose my ability to draw, to do anything with my hand, I don't lose myself.
Yeah.
I'm bigger than that. That's an
Wow.
expression, and that's how creativity comes out of me right now. But if that ever changed, I'm still me, and I
Mm.
will just find another way for creativity to come out.
Yeah, I love that.
So that's the constant reminder. Yeah. So I love having those conversations too, even around that, of like how we put reminders around us to say, here's what's important.
Yeah.
Here's what keeps me on track.
Yeah, I think that's important for here's my daughter, she's 21, and she, just outside the Beijing Olympic Games, had blown her knee. And to your point of the hand, which took me, again, a lot of time to learn this, is like, when you lose that identity as an 18-year-old, of like, she's called Miff, which is a funny name. I've called her Miff since she was born. But we've always said to her that you're not Miff the skier, you're Miff who skis and does other things too. So
Yes.
if your attachment to your creativity is through your ability to execute with your hand or your eye, then we're misunderstanding creativity, right? And if your
Mm-hmm.
worth is attached to your ability to ski, we're misunderstanding your worth as a human, or throw a football as a quarterback. That's a skill. It's a wonderful thing, but it's, who do you inspire and who do you connect through conversation and through your presence and through your value, and they're the things that I think are really important. You know,
Yeah.
and I think being
Yeah.
a cool footballer is just a cool thing to do. On top of that.
Yeah. Yeah, those things become the playgrounds and the forums at which we can actually really show up as who we are.
Yeah.
And when we learn to do that, I think that's when things really start to get interesting because opportunities come, possibilities happen. And like you said before, curiosity spurs all that stuff on. And we go like, what else could happen here? And what else can I do with what I've been given and who I am and help and serve the people around me?
Yeah. So true. I love it.
Yeah.
This is fun. We're getting deep here, man.
Yeah.
This is creativity on steroids. I love it.
Exactly. Yeah. I love having these conversations though, because we're so busy. We do a lot of things and we have a lot of things vying for our attention. And sometimes to slow down, to have those deeper thoughts and conversations, those can be gifts and moments of clarity and moments that help us realign sometimes. And to say, I'm, I'm, I'm on this journey. And at this particular mile marker, maybe I need a word of encouragement. Maybe I need a word of wisdom, and to expose yourself to that can make all the difference. I know that's one of the reasons why I started this podcast, is because I wanted to have conversations with people who either were a little further along than me or had some other experience that I didn't have. And I wanted to say, like, can you tell me about that? Because I'm dealing with something right now and I need to know that somebody else went through this and is okay. Or I need to
Yeah.
know, here's how somebody else dealt with these same, issues or whatever. And so it's always a privilege to have these conversations and to
Totally.
know that, the deep work is the real work.
And also being okay with being stuck. Being
Mm-hmm.
in just knowing that's just going to happen. I get stuck all the time, like every week. And there's days where you just go, God, this is so hard. But just getting to be comfortable with the idea that from hard comes great. Like, it's important to have that, and knowing it's coming, and then understanding that, when you're prepared for the hard or prepared for the stuck moments, then I think they're easier. But just assuming that life's all going to be up and creative and wonderful it just makes the hard times just hit a little bit harder, I think. So yeah, I just think that the creative path is a brave one, but it's a rewarding one. And I don't think that undervalues anything else you choose to do that isn't creative. But I also think that we also misunderstand creativity in a way that, like, creativity is problem solving. It's the ability to, so that feeling of the 26-year-olds, the other 74% who don't believe they're creative, I'd argue that they all are. It's a learned skill. We learn the ability to problem solve. We learn the ability to sort of sit back and reflect. And All that is creativity.
Yeah, agree. I talk about that all the time too. Of like, people say, I'm not creative, and really what they end up through the conversation uncovering is that they say, I'm not artistic. And I'm like, that's fine. Not everybody has to be artistic, but I think everybody is creative. And then it's a matter of, can we discover what that looks like for you? And then this way you can do it on purpose and with intention.
So good.
And then that gives power to people, because some people, they're really creative at like organizing things. And I'm like, I'm not, I'm a mess. And so that's a gift that you have, like lean into that. And I may need to hire you to help me do something, with organizing. And knowing that about yourself is tremendous power that you can then have in terms of creativity, and to know you're part of the club. Everybody's part of the club,
It's so true. I love that.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Well, we're at the top of our time already. I can't believe it. And I feel like there's so much more we could have, of course, discussed. But in terms of like, where can people find your book? How can they, when is it out? How can people get it?
Oh, good question. So it comes out I think it ships 29th of April. So it's in store May. You can do pre-orders. I did see on Amazon and a few other stores, you can do pre-orders now. But May 2025. And I think a good Google search will help you find it. And you've got my website as well, which is benrennie.com. Yes. And I think I'll put on there a list of retailers, but the sell-in's been wild. Like, it's interesting when you write something. I manifested this idea in my head that it's going to be in airports. I'm going to walk through an airport, I'm going to see my book. And I also had the opposite thought of that, is that no one in the world's ever going to read it, nor will someone publish it. But I think manifestation and visualizing this stuff is really important. One of the things that happened when, first of all, I got a publisher, which I never thought would happen. And the second part was they rang me and said, we've sold it to, a bunch of airports, and this is where it's going to be. So, that's that feeling of every business book I've ever bought, every Malcolm Gladwell book has been in an airport, So that was really important to me. And the fact that has happened is just so cool. And it comes back to this idea of, being in the room, and first of all, stepping into creative confidence to write it. The second part is believing that it's going to be somewhere for someone to read. That's really important as well. And here we are. I get to talk to you about it, which is wild.
So good. So good. And I wish you all the best with it. I hope that it goes far and wide and reaches a lot of people, and has those moments that you can never plan for, but that where someone picks it up and interacts and goes, that's exactly what I needed to hear or read in this moment. Thank you. It's a gift.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Appreciate you so much. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm looking forward to following your journey and just finding out more as we go along. We'll say goodbye, but we'll say until next time as well. Thanks for listening today. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe, leave a rating and a review. It really helps this podcast be seen and heard by others.